Welcome back to Reddit Aliens, everyone. I'm your host, John, so thanks for being here. Let's talk about a great topic and one of my favorites. True crime junkies of Reddit. What's a case you've heard or read about that's actually kept you up at night? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. I decided to listen to the tape of the Jonestown Massacre once, and it definitely scarred me. It's so upsetting, it's beyond heartbreaking to think of all of those folks murdered, manipulated by a single awful, megalomaniac asshole. Most of the deaths were children. You can hear them starting to cry as people start dying. One of the worst moments is there's this point where a woman tries to argue, letting the children go, and you hear this backlash from the crowd of brainwashed adults, how it would have been wrong to let the children live. Jones egging them on, of course. Ugh, I hate that man. Catherine Knight, in the Hunter Valley, NSW, this crazy bitch worked at an arbiter and loved her work. Kept her butcher's knives above her bed. Pure psycho. Had a string of boyfriends and husbands. Did things that made them nope the F out of there. The last boyfriend she had, John Price, she stabbed him to death, skinned him, hung his skin from a meat hook in a doorway in the house, cut parts of meat from his dead body, cooked it up with vegetables, and served it on a plate for his kids. Police also found his severed head in a pot on the stove. This crazy bitch is the only woman in Australia to ever be sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Husband and wife had a daughter killed, ripped apart by dogs, but at trial the wounds were clean, like they were made with a knife, so the jury convicted and they went to jail. It was found out years later that the hospital, in trying to save them, cut away the infected parts with a scalpel. So effing scary that these people lost their young child, then were convicted and sent to prison for something they obviously didn't do. They couldn't even mourn their kids properly. I can't remember the name, nor will I do a good job of explaining it, but it was one of these two teenage brothers who decided they wanted to become serial killers. Before they started, they thought they and their younger brother didn't know what was happening and locked themselves in their bathroom with the baby. The part that really breaks my heart is one of the brothers pounded on the door and tricked the boy into letting him in because he said the other brother was the killer and he needed to hide from him. The boy, who couldn't have been older than 9, let him in and he was killed along with the baby. All this was recorded during a 911 call. My memory of the case is hazy, but I believe the sister, though she was stabbed, managed to get outside the house and alert neighbors. Anyway, F them. I believe the family has a small gazebo in their memory, but I may be wrong. Abducted in Plain Sight is one of the wildest and most nonsensical child abduction grooming stories you will watch in your life. Basically, this little girl's neighbor snatches her up, convinces her that she's an alien and has to hook up with him. Also, he convinced her father to give him a handjob, and I think he hooks up with her mom too. I've yet to find a documentary as compelling as this one. I've never heard of this one before, but it sounds out of this world wild, so might have to check out that podcast. Thanks for sharing. The Toybox Killer. Just the tapes he would play to the victims. The man was beyond evil, and he got away with it for over 40 years. He was only caught because his accomplice made a mistake after 40 years of torture, rape, and murder. In high school, I worked long hours, stocking soft drinks around the county I lived in and listened to true crime podcasts to pass the time. The Golden State Killer was one that always had me looking over my shoulder and staying up at night because the 7-part podcast series that was over 8 hours long ended with the fact that they never caught him. This was before they found out who the killer was through DNA testing. This one happened a couple streets away from me and was the whole reason I developed an interest, but it still disturbs me. The case of Becky Watts. She was a teenager who went missing, and it turns out her stepbrother, I think, and his girlfriend suffocated her, sawed her body into pieces, and put her in a suitcase and left her in a garden shed. What makes this so terrifying for me personally is I was a little younger when it happened, and I vividly remember walking home from school and being terrified because I saw a black bag full to the brim and tied up on the road, and knowing she was missing, out 2 and 2 together, it effing terrified me. Kenneth Allan McDuff. Get this. He murdered 3 teenagers in cold blood in the mid-60s. He was caught, convicted, and sentenced to death by electrocution for it. His sentence was relegated to life in prison after the US suspended the death penalty in the 70s. Then, he got released from prison due to overcrowding in 1989 and went on to murder more people in cold blood. One victim, Colleen Reed, was kidnapped by McDuff while she was at a car wash. She then had cigarettes put out on her and then was raped and murdered. McDuff joked in prison that she squawked like a chicken when she was strangled. He was a complete piece of shit, but what blows my mind is that Texas, of all states, let this obvious psychopath slip through the cracks. Colleen Reed, Melissa Northrup, and Regina Moore would still be alive today if McDuff never got out of prison. Texas has blood on their hands here. I have 3. Junko Farouda, most definitely. She went through 45 days of torture, assault, dehumanization, all for her killers to walk free. The murder of Ronald Woodsworth by Shelley Notek. I cried until I was sick when I read the account If You Tell by Greg Olson. The murder of Buddy Musso made me sick to my stomach. I couldn't even get through the 30-minute watered-down ID special on it. Oppalika Jane Doe. About a decade ago, if I recall correctly, the partial skull of a young girl was found in Oppalika. From this, it was clear that she had been malnourished and abused during her short life. Later, pictures of her at a local VBS were found, but to this day she remained unidentified, and her abusers, and quite possibly murderers, have not faced justice. Brandon Lawson. Even now, he's found. I don't know what to believe. I don't think my opinion has changed much. Lee Boxwell and Kevin Hicks. I wonder why they haven't been linked, given the geography. I see a lot of similarities. Luke Durbin. I lived in Ipswich at the time. Also, at the time the serial killer Steve Wright was on the go, and 2 of his victims helped a very pregnant me carry my shopping upstairs to my flat. Toybox Killer. It's one of the few I didn't read the story of. I have an understanding of what happened, and the amount I know is too effing much. The FBI agent in charge of the case killed himself. It broke him so bad. It's absolutely horrible. Also, that Japanese girl, I think her name was Junko. There's a few more, but I actively try to forget them and block them. For me, there's true crime I find interesting in a morbid way, like Dahmer or Ed Gein and stuff like that. But the ones with excessive torture are too disturbing. I know Dahmer could be considered torture, but it doesn't mess with me like the others at all, because he usually drugged his victims and got them drunk, not kept them alive for long periods while making their lives pure agony and degradation. I really wish we had some medieval execution that we saved specifically for the people like the Toybox Killer. If they were found guilty, without a shadow of a doubt, they should be slowly broken on the wheel, then boiled alive or executed with the boats where bugs eat them alive. It really bothers me that such monsters are in the world. I prevented my girlfriend from getting kidnapped late one night when we were walking down the road one night and a guy in a car sped into the wrong lane and stopped so close to her, the car was almost touching her. He opened the door to pull her in, but I was already sprinting towards the car, screaming like a psycho, and thankfully he sped off. It shocks me how common it can be and how much human trafficking goes on. If I could keep a roof over my head and devote my life to preventing human trafficking and rescuing people, I'd like to do it. As long as I could live a meager existence and have enough cheap food to survive, I'd do it if I knew a way. It really effing disturbs me. Alright, this post brings up an interesting topic that we can drop down in the comment section. Capital punishment. Should it be completely abolished? Should it be a case-by-case basis? And if it was okay, are there any limits to what you would do to horrible people that hurt children or innocent people? The BBP case. Baby P and my brother were born on the same day in the same hospital. Baby P's mom was opposite my mom's hospital bed, and my mom knew her from before due to her living about 5 to 10 minute walk from our old house. My mom said that Baby P's mom was constantly leaving him to go outside for cigarettes, meeting up with people, etc., and was just leaving the baby crying constantly, which made other newborns cry too. It's sad because whenever my mom saw her around, she always seemed like a lovely woman, and nobody can predict when someone will kill their own child. Hello Kitty murder. Name is already given, maxed messages. A group of men committed the murder, torture of a young woman somewhere in China, and forced some little girl to watch, who later reported it to the police. They killed the woman after about a week of torture, and stuffed the body in a mermaid Hello Kitty stuffed plushie. I'm a big fan of Hello Kitty, have been ever since I was little, and I had a lot of Hello Kitty plushies scattered all over my room, but ever since that case, I can't look at them the same way again. I am one of those girls that go to sleep watching true crime stories. One case that really had me thinking was the case of one, maybe the youngest arsonist. He was a 9-year-old boy who faced 5 counts of murder for burning his family's mobile home. This included 2 toddlers. He was diagnosed with multiple mental disorders. Many words had to be explained to him, as he didn't know the vocabulary of the court. Did he actually know what he was doing? Does he feel remorse now? How will this affect his adulthood? The serial drowner. This is a Finnish case I wrote a podcast script about once. Basically, he was this semi-charismatic bully who kept an entourage of his small town's most desperate alcoholics around his house and just abused them for shits and giggles until they dropped dead. His MO was to first get everyone super drunk, then announce that everyone was going for a picnic to a nearby island and had to get in his dinghy. Then, halfway to the island, he knocks the boat over, and as a skilled swimmer, saves himself and watched the others try to make it back to shore. And if the cops came, well, everyone was really drunk, and he was more lucid, so he just said it was an accident and ignored what the others were rambling on about. This went on for years, but eventually a neighbor witnessed him actually forcing one of his victims underwater. The story of Colonel Russell Williams, big guy in the Canadian military that's now in prison for murdering 2 women and raping others. He had a long history of breaking into people's homes and stealing women's and girls' underwear. The part that gave me the heebie-jeebies was on one occasion that he recounted where he had snuck into a woman's house and she happened to come home. He hid and said at one point she literally walked right by him and didn't notice he was there. I was checking inside closets and behind the shower curtain for a bit after listening to that. The Soham murders, 2002. During the extensive search for 2 missing 10-year-old girls, the media interviewed many local residents. One man in particular, who was the last to see the girls before their disappearance, was interviewed numerous times during the 2-week search, becoming somewhat of an unofficial spokesman for the community. You can still watch a lot of his interviews online. His constant media presence caused some of his acquaintances to notice the lies in his story, which they reported to the already suspicious police. So creepy to read his ever-changing accounts of what happened to those poor girls, and especially to watch his interviews with hindsight. The murder of Nona Dirksmeyer. I was pregnant with my son at the time and live in the same county where it happened. It kept me up many nights and still does at times. The man they think did it is in prison now for a totally different reason, trying to kidnap numerous women at Walmart and Hobby Lobby. And her boyfriend at the time, who they tried to first pin it on, was found not guilty and became a defense lawyer. The police did such a shoddy job getting evidence that they really have none. They just automatically accused the boyfriend, while the other guy, who had just gotten out of prison for trying to kill a female jogger 2 years before, who was also Nona's neighbor, was helping the police. His ex-wife is one who pointed the police to him. You'd have to look it up. There are so many mistakes that were made, but it still scares me to think about. There is a Dateline episode about it. I mean, we all know that an investigative force are not going to be held accountable if they make giant errors. But what about monetarily? Do you think that if there are egregious errors in investigation, that could open that up to the family seeking some type of punitive damage? I don't know. I have a book about John Wayne Gacy that was written by the lawyer who defended him. One night, Gacy got drunk and confessed everything to this lawyer. They were acquaintances beforehand, and there was one thing he said that gave him chills. He was describing how he would not always remember killing his victims afterwards. He said sometimes along the lines of, "Sometimes I wake up, walk out of my living room, and there would be a dead kid on my floor. That effed me up." Being that desensitized to something like murder. I remember an episode of Forensic Files where a woman walked into her house and was shot and killed by someone in the house. Turns out the killer was about to start a jail sentence for molesting his baby, and he decided he wanted to go to jail as a murderer instead of a pedophile because he knew how inmates feel about pedophiles. He just randomly chose that house, and she happened to get home before her husband, or else he might have been the one killed. The Hello Kitty murder. Trigger warning: pedophilia, sexual assault, violence, though that should be assumed. A night hostess, she worked in a brothel, was kidnapped by 3 gang mafia members from the Triad in China. They tortured and sexually assaulted her for a month before killing her and putting her head in a Hello Kitty doll. The only reason they were caught is that one of the members' girlfriends, who was 14 at the time, reported the crime because she claimed that the hostess's ghost was following her. I feel like I should mention that her boyfriend was in his 30s or late 20s. Let me know if I got any details wrong so I can correct it, but Jesus Christ, this one was horrible. Albert Fish, aka the Gray Man, serial killer, serial rapist, serial child molester, and serial cannibal. Going into actual detail would require a podcast all on its own, but let's just say there was the single most effed up human being to ever exist. Sadomasochistic and a sadist, he would rape boys and then mutilate their penises, shove needles into his own body, and had a lifelong fascination with sacrificing a child to God, like in the story of Abraham. When he was finally executed by electric chair, MFer was excited. When I was 8, I somehow came across a video about this mother who snapped. She had some mental illness and drowned all her children, but it wasn't that easy. She had to chase them and hold them down in the bathtub. One of the kids apologized before he died. Messed me up. Made me scared my mom would also snap when no one was home. Peter Kürten, a very prolific German serial killer who I believe was active in the 20s and 30s. I read a book about him, and while many serial killers are tragically evil, Dahmer comes to mind, and many others struggle with mental health, substance abuse, and sexuality and errors with fewer resources than we have today, Kürten is just plain evil. Literally so many, but the one that just truly doesn't make sense to me is the JonBenet Ramsey case. She was murdered and found in her house, wasn't found during the initial searches, and wasn't even found by law enforcement, but by her own dad. Yet there was nothing linking any one of the family members to her murder. Sus. Joe Callinger. He ended up involving his kid in the torture and murder of his victims, and that just always stuck out to me as extra disturbing. Definitely not the only killer to do this, but I was about 13 when I read about this case, which was around the age his son was when he started involving him, so it stuck with me. I was one of the many victims of Vincent Walters, one of the U.S. Marshal's 15 most wanted fugitives, accused of murdering a woman in San Diego. He was a surprisingly charming, really comfortable to be around. Everyone in the neighborhood knew him by his alias, and he even began a new family using said alias. He was a really funny guy who would always greet everyone, and we all saw he was a loving husband and father. You would have never guessed what he was up to. He even sometimes made barbecues at his home and frequently made a joke like, "Oh yeah, the FBI is looking for me." Whenever he talked about himself, we all took it with humor. When he got captured and the truth got unveiled, no one could believe it. Allegedly, his words when getting caught were, "It was about time." I really think he was making an effort on starting over again, as we all knew him as a hard-working, charismatic man, but what truly disturbed everyone is the fact that we all felt like we can never finish knowing anyone. I would rather remember him by the person I met, and hopefully he'll be someday reintegrated into society and may be able to go back with his family. I still think about the victim and feel really sad for her, but we also saw his new family suffer a lot with his desperate departure. It's just 3 mixed feelings that can keep me up at night.